Morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this very special segment today on the 14th day of September 2022. And it's a glorious day here in Brisbane once again, 18 degrees and sunny. And what a beautiful day it is. Well, right now, let's get on with the news. One news is that the Daily India report could not make it here today due to some technical difficulties. We will resume tomorrow, but at 10 a.m., we have the real estate update with Usha Chandra of GlobeNet Realty. So right now, let's see what's making news. And of course, the biggest news at this point in time is the Queen's coffin, which has arrived in London and been taken to Buckingham Palace. Here's the report.
Yeah, certainly. They've all pulled over on the other side. Yes, people have literally got out, maybe because the traffic's jammed, and got out and they're taking pictures and stuff, yeah.
I was in the throng of people just down behind this media tent. People waiting in sombre reflection, in silence. They had gathered here for hours waiting for the Queen's coffin to be brought back to Buckingham Palace, and as soon as the hearse came along the road behind me and towards the gates of Buckingham Palace, there was spontaneous cheers, spontaneous ringing out of hip hip hooray, a celebration of the Queen's life as we see the pictures of the hearse and the motorcade going through. Quite incredible scenes. It's a very wet night here in London that did not stop at all. People in their droves coming out to say their final farewell to Her Majesty, and indeed those scenes were replicated on the way from the Royal Air Force Base, where the Queen's coffin arrived via jets an hour previously along a very busy highway. People actually got out of their cars and stood in silent tribute to the hearse as it drove by. So an indication of what we can expect now that the Queen is back in London over the next 4 days as she heads to the state funeral next Monday. It capped off an emotional day. The Queen was transported from Edinburgh. People in their droves again lined up to see her at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh before that flight back from the Edinburgh Air Force Base to London. So very big day, and it was quite emotional to watch, to be honest, Madeline.
Yeah, just everywhere the Queen's coffin has been passing, just the crowds are absolutely lining the route, Michael. It's quite extraordinary to see. What about King Charles? What has he been up to overnight?
He has had a busy day. He was in Northern Ireland. This is part of his visit to Scotland. He's been there. He was in Northern Ireland today, and he'll go to Wales at the end of the week. As we all know, there are divided opinions about the monarchy in Northern Ireland, given the sectarian strife there for many decades. But the King received a rapturous welcome by the people who turned up to greet him at Hillsborough Castle, which is the royal residence in Northern Ireland. He greeted local dignitaries, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and had an official reception before he and the Queen Consort Camilla went to a special religious service elsewhere in Belfast. So a very important day for the King. He flew back to Buckingham Palace a couple of hours before the Queen arrived so he could be there with his sons, both Prince Harry and Prince William, the Prince of Wales, to greet the Queen's hearse as it arrived. As I said, an indication of what lies ahead here in London for the next 4 days. Our colleague Barbara Miller is not far from me down on the Mall here, where people have been turning up to catch a glimpse of the Queen. Barbara, describe the scene where you are.
As you say, Michael, some pretty heavy rain. It's really getting more intense, but still many people milling about here. I think there was some confusion as the Queen's hearse came into Buckingham Palace. Some people lined up here, I think, hoping it would come along the Mall. This is, in fact, part of the route tomorrow that she will take when she is taken to lie in state. So along the Mall, she'll turn in and go through Horse Guards Parade. That's that huge open square where the Trooping of the Colour takes place every year, where we see the royal family at the end of that event on the balcony of Buckingham Palace during the flyover. She'll then turn into Whitehall, past 10 Downing Street, where the new Prime Minister Liz Truss has just recently been installed, past the Cenotaph, where she for many years has laid wreaths, the War Memorial there, and then on to Westminster Hall. So many people still out, the rain not seeming to dampen the spirits so far, but certainly a factor in planning and preparation, of course, in terms of how people are going to hold out if they have to spend many hours standing here.
And when we speak about people holding out, Barbara, we are talking potentially, aren't we, about hundreds of thousands of people lining up to view the Queen lying in state?
The estimates are that there could be, let's just see if someone else, excuse me, did you go down to try and see the Queen?
We did see we saw her pass, yeah.
You saw her?
Yeah.
And how was that?
Very emotional, actually, yeah. Felt quite tearful. I didn't expect to feel like that, but yeah.
And how, I mean, it's pretty miserable weather. How much do you think you'll try and participate in the events of the coming days?
I've got to work, but we may come down again, might we? I said, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Michael, so they're expecting up to 750,000 people possibly lining up to come and see the Queen as she lies in state for about 4.5 days. In total, about 200,000 came 20 years ago to see the Queen Mother. We were down there a little earlier, still just a few people there at the moment. I wouldn't imagine that line would grow too much overnight tonight with this weather, but let's see how that grows starting from tomorrow morning UK time.
We will see indeed. Barbara Miller, thank you so much for Madeline and Greg. Yes, we now turn our attention to the Queen lying in state. She spends her last night tonight in Buckingham Palace, a residence she lived in for much of her life. She did spend a lot of time in Balmoral and other parts, but this building behind me was her home. She's spending the last night there with members of her family in silent vigil before that 4-day lying in state period begins tomorrow. So a very big week or half a week ahead here in London.
Yeah, so a little bit of a lull in proceedings now that this logistical phase of the mourning period is underway. Michael, I imagine part of the days ahead, though, will be used to prepare for the huge influx of foreign dignitaries who will be arriving later this week for the eventually funeral.
Yes, if I hear the word security nightmare one more time, I think perhaps our colleagues have uttered it as well, so I won't go too hard on it. I'll scream, but yeah, we are talking about a security challenge, let's say, with hundreds of prime ministers, presidents, members of European royal families coming to take part in the official celebration of Queen Elizabeth's life at the state funeral. A logistical challenge for police here, where to put the heads of state, and more importantly, how to transport them from their hotels to Westminster Abbey, where the state funeral is held. We're told most leaders, including quite possibly the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, will have to slum it in buses. Special exceptions are being made for US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron and Israel's Prime Minister. They get to have their heavily guarded motorcades, but just as a way of transporting as many VIPs as possible. We are talking about coaches, so at least they can brush up on their small talk in the seats on the way to the state funeral.
They can. Quite an operation that lays ahead in the days between now and the funeral. Stay dry, Michael. We'll talk to you again soon.
And what an amazing report. And as Michael said there, that every scene is very emotional. And it is, even just seeing his pass through and the crowd, just makes you very emotional. I get very emotional every time I just witness that. Well, right now, as they were talking about what's happening with Prince Charles, so his movement. An exercise, as we can see, so a lot of protocols that need to be followed on, and as they mentioned that it is getting through all those formalities, the logistic things. Well, here's a speech that King Charles III made at Hillsborough Castle.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most heartfelt thanks for your condolences. I'm here today at a time of great personal sorrow as we mark the death of my beloved mother after a life most faithfully dedicated to the duty to which she had been called. It is fitting that we should meet at Hillsborough, which my mother knew so well, and in whose beautiful rose garden she always took such pleasure. In the years since she began her long life of public service, my mother saw Northern Ireland pass through momentous and historic changes. Through all those years, she never ceased to pray for the best of times for this place and its people, whose stories she knew, whose sorrows our family had felt, and for whom she had a great affection and regard. My mother felt deeply, I know, the significance of the role she herself played in bringing together those whom history had separated and in extending a hand to make possible the healing of long-held hurts. At the very beginning of her life of service, the Queen made a pledge to dedicate herself to her country and her people, and to maintain the principles of constitutional government. This promise she kept with steadfast faith. Now, with that shining example before me, and with God's help, I take up my new duties resolved to seek the welfare of all the inhabitants of Northern Ireland. During the years of my mother's reign, it has been a privilege to bear witness to such a devoted life. May it be granted to us all to fulfill the tasks before us so well.
And once again, very, very well said. Well, right now, let's move on to some other news in today's segment.
So you just lost me there.
Finding him extremely difficult to keep on track, police interview Melissa Caddick's husband, Anthony Coletti, yet again.
But you told her that she was in bed.
Well, I lied to him because I wanted his honest opinion.
All right, an opinion about what? So I just don't understand.
Whether he was with Melissa or not.
An inquiry into her suspected death has heard police at the time thought he knew more than he was letting on. A risk assessment prepared after her disappearance noted a significant possibility that Miss Caddick has been injured or killed, possibly by Mr. Coletti, as a result of her criminal activity. There also exists the real possibility that Miss Caddick has fled or committed self-harm in the face of her pending prosecution. The first officer in charge, an experienced missing persons detective, was more persuaded by the latter. You didn't suspect she may have been the victim of homicide? Definitely not. There was no evidence to suggest she'd been murdered. He began investigating possible suicide or her going to ground. I knew that Melissa had been under investigation for matters that involved quite high dollar value deception offences. I thought she may have had access to funds. She may have taken steps to leave. A week after her reported disappearance, Detective Sergeant Michael Kiner says he believed Melissa Caddick could still be alive and was hiding inside the house. Police searched the three-storey family home for just 14 minutes. The inquest continues. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Sydney.
So there you go, the inquest still continues. Well, right now, the next news is about stranded Papua New Guinea earthquake survivors airlifted to safety.
Areas in Morobe province that are still inaccessible, and I guess that's the biggest fear, that the information's coming out too slowly from those areas, and especially those areas in and around the epicenter of the quake. And it's relatively close to Lae City, but it's in the hinterlands and largely mountainous, inaccessible. Digicel, which is the biggest service provider for telecommunications, has indicated that its towers, some of its towers and infrastructure have been damaged by the quake. Telecom and Dataco have also said that the quake also damaged the fibre link from Australia. So these are the issues that are compounding the access to information, which is very much needed to bring about the proper assessment for authorities.
I guess the assessment too, and also getting people to the areas if they need help.
Yes, that has always been a big problem with disasters in Papua New Guinea, because it's one thing getting the information to authorities for assessment, and then another totally different thing trying to get people from the bases into those areas affected. So it's all those problems compounded, and which makes it a very complicated situation for Papua New Guinea disaster management.
Yeah. Is there any sense of how many people may be without homes and shelter?
From the pictures I've seen, and those are pictures that have been sent to me, the homes are damaged. I guess they're still livable, but it's unsafe for them to live in those areas that have been that have seen landslips. And in some places, we've got one report of a village being buried. I haven't been able to verify that really well. I've been able to see, I've got reports from the chopper pilots who did the medivacs immediately after the quake, and they brought people into Ley City for treatment. And the husband and wife were brought in. The husband died of his injuries. There was a 19-year-old woman who didn't make it before the medevac happened. She was killed when they were foraging for food at the base of a cliff. So it's a whole host of issues that we have to deal with. It's similar to the quake in 2019. The experience is similar in that the damage is not visibly seen as you would in an urban area where large buildings are affected. It's tiny hamlets and people who are scattered that are affected by it, and water sources being affected.
Yeah, and that is the concern if water sources are being affected. In terms of aftershocks, are there still concerns there may be some more?
We haven't really had any aftershock after that big quake that happened, and that's been unusual. A lot of people were expecting aftershocks like the 2018 one, but for this one, no. We had a tiny quake at about 1 a.m. this morning, and that was it. So no other quakes.
Scott, you're of course in Ley. Give us a sense of what it felt like at the time.
Yeah, we were in a house. We're in a house on stilts and metal stilts, and that the house was shaking quite violently. Usually the quakes last about 30 seconds to a minute, but this one was went on for about over a minute, so it scared us a bit. Everything was shaking, everything was falling off the shelves. We went down onto the ground, away from the power lines, and even the ground felt like waves going through it. So it was an unnerving experience, quite unusual. Yeah. In the University of Goroka, where the student dormitories were, that also suffered a considerable amount of damage. It's a big brick building, high-rise building that had the surface of it ripped off. In another education institution along the highway, the brick walls also came off, so lots of damage everywhere.
Yeah, so a lot of sort of work and restoration and recovery that's going to be needed over coming months and weeks.
Yes, yes.
A lot of recovery work that really needs to be done there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to look at our functions and events. Ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you in this segment. Don't forget that at 10 a.m. we have the weekly real estate update with Usha Chandra of GlobeNet Realty. We will look forward to seeing you then.